Thanks everybody for coming today. This is going to be a meaty topic. I would love for people to chime in the chat. I spent a lot of time looking into things. This is a topic I'm very interested in. So I hope you come with questions and comments. And again, feel free to pop that in the chat anytime, and we'll get to them when it makes sense. A couple quick disclaimers, as always. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. So, if you do come on screen during the time that we allow, like camera and audio, you may get included on YouTube. But if that's something that you don't want, just message me and we can take care of that. But first, what I want to talk about is the state of AI. AI is not just everywhere. It's also intensifying the work world. Recent analysis by ActiveTrack's Productivity Lab has found that the scope and pace of work is expanding with the proliferation of AI tools instead of reducing hours. That means we're not just using more tools, we're overburdening ourselves. We've found that perfect mixture of tools that are not quite useful enough to free us of work and just useful enough to give us extra tasks on top of our tasks. We're killing it. And when I say that, I mean our work-life balance. So how do you separate the clutter from the utility? This webinar has it all. Stats, stories, and even some sarcasm. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. I didn't use generative AI to write the intro. I just wanted to pretend to be AI for a minute. But I'm going to give us all a chance before we talk about technology to touch some grass for a second. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about AI buzz and what we're seeing, what's useful, what isn't worth the hype, what we think might not be worth the hype, and what we're looking forward to in the future. There's a lot of conversation about, is there an AI bubble? Is it going to burst? That kind of thing. And just this week, I sent out an email about this, actually, as one of the webinar invites. Sora, OpenAI's video project, just folded and they lost $1 billion contract. So, is that the first domino, or, is there a whole lot of other things that would need to happen for an AI bubble to burst? And, is there a sweet spot with AI? How do we think about, and that's such a big category, and we'll kind of talk about all the different things that get, lumped into this category as well. And then some resource suggestions of our own. So really excited, a lot of ground to cover. Before we move on from the grass slide, is there anything you want to add, Al, that you're looking forward to talking about today?
Yeah, this one is a little weird, but it's more home to me as well, given my uh, pre-real estate experience and technology adoption in very mature organizations, startups, middle size. I've seen the e-commerce hype and bubble. I've seen the internet adoption with a little bit of the gray hair, and right before that with the PC adoption. So it's a cycle and it repeats itself, and we've seen that before. Now this one is going to be more intensified, we believe, but that's why you also see the hype also more intensified. So um, nothing new. It's another technology adoption, a lot of another financial bubble, and another cycle of adoption. It's just a little more accelerated, and things are moving much, much faster. So we're going to cover. Sammy will share with you what's happening. I'll chime in on my experiences throughout the years, but also making sure that it's a generic thing that you can apply in your own work or career or businesses. And then we'll wrap it up with how we're using it within the real estate space as well. So it's a little more generic than our usual presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's important to remember that, and I'll share a resource at the end that covers this. Even if you feel like an AI bubble burst, like is so far away from affecting you, it's such a big part of our economy right now. We talked about that in January, in our webinar in January, that, the broad implications of something like that can affect everybody, can affect your investments, it can affect your work life, your personal life. So Definitely something that touches everything, even if you feel like it's more niche. It really isn't right now, because of how much money is, in that industry.
And you'll see that we're going to talk about it in general. We're not going to promote any tool like 99.999% of everybody on the internet. This is the tool or that is the tool. That's not the intent here.
Yeah, our resources are a little different. Most of them are books, I think. So, I think that should tell you something. So in terms of AI, I feel like the two conversations that I hear the most in terms of like a fantastical, exciting future and things that may not be as far off as we think include self-driving cars and humanoid robots. And anytime I get asked a question like, what kind of technology would you love to have? I'm like, I would love to have a Rosie in my house, from the Jetsons, doing everything for me, like cooking, cleaning, laundry. I mean, I like cooking, but sometimes you don't feel like doing it, right? And a couple wisecracking jokes, like that would be really nice. Or an adorable Wally, that would be great. And, there's definitely a lot of people in the humanoid robot space. One of the articles I read, and I should include a resource list at the end. I'll make sure to put that on our YouTube video of everything that we covered. Um, humanoidrobotstechnology.com has like a top 12 robots to, look out for in the new year. And I would say two in particular that have gotten a lot of buzz. The first one is Fauna Robotics. So this is an Amazon company. The focus is like, this is a little humanoid robot too. It's like not very big at all. There's like pictures and videos of it walking hand in hand with like a kid, and kids putting magnets all over it. It's like this is safe and fun and playful and a companion and easily portable and all of that stuff. No pinch points. So, if your kid gets into the elbow and not going to get hurt or anything like that. And the other, and this robot, just to say, is more of like a development platform. So the idea here is they're trying to attract developers to make this robot do specific things. So it's not actually like carrying out set tasks. It's up to the developers to create what they want this robot to do. The other one that is like pre-programmed or supposedly pre-programmed to do certain tasks, especially around the home, is the Neo robot by 1X. And this may be one that you have seen. I feel like, especially late last year, like October, it got a lot of buzz. And right now it's available for pre-order, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you can either like buy it outright for, I want to say like 20K, something like that, or it's like $500 a month. And it's also meant to be very like soft and human like, and it can do things like your dishes or answer the door or vacuum your house, things like that. And this, is being billed as like a very exciting, promising technology to improve the workload in your house. But I think what's really interesting is there was a Wall Street Journal video feature about this robot. And what they found out in the demonstration that they had in this like staged house that they came to visit was that 100% of the tasks were being carried out by a human, 100% by a human in a VR headset. So it wasn't actually automated in any way, although that is the promise that it will learn how to do these things and then do them automatically in your home. There was a human behind the scenes working on everything. And the founder of the company has said, well, yeah, if you sign up for something like this as an early adopter, you're going to have to accept that there's going to be a human behind the scenes, like training. And that's just like the cost of being on the bleeding edge of technology. You are the test subject. You're paying tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars a month to be a test subject with this technology. And there have been some recent videos from the company demoing that this robot can do certain tasks autonomously. But I will say I watched it. It's like 5 to 10 seconds of video. It's kind of hard to see how much it actually learns, but they have said that it has progressed. So within the course of like 4 or 5 months, perhaps it has learned to do other things in these, and they did like these chaotic things, like lights flashing on and off and people running all over, and it's still like cutting vegetables or whatever. So it's kind of interesting. But still a long way off from, I would say, being useful every day in the home.
Yeah, one thing to add there, I think there's a lot of advancement into the remote um, surgery, where surgeons kind of operate remotely, and that is a thing. And medicine and surgery is leading that. I think it's in NASA too, where you can do um, when they get out of the spaceship, whatever they call them, the International Space Station, and do some very dangerous maintenance or whatever remotely. But again, this is a bleeding edge. So if you think about like the adoption curve and what Sammy just showed, they're all like early. But I would see that automation at home and doing tasks that are less dangerous, insurance related, risky, would advance further in the house first than in industrial applications or commercial applications. So I see this moving fast. It's that also there's the training gets faster the more you train. So think about how Tesla used to have so many accidents early on, but now all the cameras are all on all the time, training all Teslas at all the time. And so the more, even if it's VR based, it's gonna improve really quickly. Think about like the vacuum, the iRobot, whatever you used to call them. They're perfect now. Remember when they were like not hang up under the table or whatever, knowing what to do next. So this is not like extremely early, but at least I can see home automation to be one of the leading edges when it comes to robots. A teacher, one of my students' teacher texted me the other day and was like, "Hey, read this article. They're trying to promote robotic teachers, and they say they're going to be less emotional." And she's being funny about it, but they started to think about like bringing those robots in schools too, especially the basic ones that Sammy showed earlier, like the Amazon project. So there are some applications, but it's very early, and it's going to be extremely expensive and annoying early on. But that's the nature of early adoption: is you love the technology and you believe, but it's not practical.
Yeah, for sure. And when I talk about industries, I think, and the one of the resources I mentioned at the end talks about this too. You got to think about the difference between like how narrow the model is versus how wide it is, right? With these neo robots, it's like you're asking it to do a myriad of different tasks in your home, in all kinds of different environments and situations. The amount that needs to be trained for that to work properly is immense, versus like your this narrow set, like we'll talk about with healthcare, identifying, imaging, and it's trained on a very narrow set of data and it's very precise. The time it takes to reach success with that is going to be a lot shorter than like, here's this big wide world out here.
And what happens typically, which is the right adoption, think about like, how we like to go to Geek Squad and Best Buy and be immersed into tech and new tech. Um, you're going to end up with 17,000 gadgets before they consolidate. So that's how it's going to be. You're going to have cameras and infrared sensors all over your house. Think about the privacy. Just to train things. You're going to record yourself 24/7, voice wise, sleep, health. I'm wearing the watch, like everything. And, so there's going to be much more sensors, much more cameras, no privacy to actually make these useful. So think about the adoption cost on the human side, not even on the money side. But
Yeah.
it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Whenever you wear this, your body now is in the cloud. Whenever you have cameras and sensors at the house and microphones, then everything's gonna be recorded.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's one of the emerging technologies we'll talk about later too, like the sensors throughout, the ubiquitous sensors, right? But I think, when we look at things like humanoid robots, it's easy to be like, wow, that's like big scale, big future things, right? But we are going to mostly talk about AI in the workplace and, things that we see happening in the not too distant future, things that are already happening. Right now, well, as of November 2025, 88% of organizations reported using some kind of AI. I would assume most of it is like generative AI or maybe, vibe coding types of projects, automating manual tasks. But most of the businesses say that they're in the experimentation and pilot phase, like they haven't scaled these projects. And they're only using AI for 1 to 2 business functions, maybe 3. Once you get to 3, it's like 51% of respondents said that they were using it. And then when you get to 4 or more, it drops to 33%. So while they report using it, right, it could be something like Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT. Like it might not be like a big rollout, and nothing is being like, not a lot is being formalized or scaled quite yet. It's like these isolated uses.
And it's funny, like you come to talk to someone like me, the consultant, and I'll tell you, yeah, maybe you need AI this or AI that. But in reality, the biggest consultant, McKinsey, they talked about, yeah, 88% adoption, 80% adoption, 8% ROI, 8% ROI. So the same consultants who wants to AI everything, they're telling you in reality is not yielding productivity yet. It is improving certain functions and certain roles specifically. And we'll talk about that in Investream and how we actually played around and all that. But ROI is 8% at best, 10% right now. So, which is interesting.
Yeah, I would say that's even in a lot of cases optimistic, which I'll get into with I think the bad. But yeah, there's a lot of hype. Like there's a lot of adoption. There's a lot of people jumping on. That's something I hear a lot from my friends. Like I'm in group chats and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, they told me to use Claude again," or whatever. And I'm like, "How do you feel like it's working?" They're like, "Not great," Like, "Oh, okay." So it's definitely like something that, I hear from friends like all the time. And, I think there is the question of does the hype match the reality? And does that mean we have an AI bubble? And if we do, what happens when it pops? So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but what a pretty picture, right? All right, anyway. Uh, but what we'll first start talking about is kind of like the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI in terms of like uh, current uses and potential uses and current drawbacks and potential drawbacks. Is there anything you want to cover before I jump into these?
I mean, the elephant in the room is going to replace humans, right? This is how everybody talks about it. And then is it going to drive productivity? And then Sammy mentioned, is it going to impact your 401k? Those are like the personal side of it. Is it going to replace you? Is it going to complement you? Is it going to change the way you work? And then is it going to impact your 401k, even if you're not even into AI world?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I'm like the queen of it depends. So a lot of this presentation is going to be it depends. But this is something that I've actually written about a lot, like these applications in other venues. So this is a topic I find myself going back to week after week, and there's certain applications that just seem to pop up in each industry. So I wanted to talk about like some of the cool things that AI can do or will do, is likely to do. I think for manufacturing, predictive maintenance is like one of the coolest features where, if you've got the right sensors on your equipment and you can have models trained to look at the wear and tear on that equipment, it can alert you when maintenance is needed so that there isn't a shutdown on your factory floor and you're like losing all this time and money. So I think that is a really cool application of AI. And obviously, again, this is like a narrower set of data that it's being trained on. Same with like supply chain optimization or just like logistics in general. You might think that you know the best route to get from place to place or the best way to, finish your procurement or whatever, but there may be better ways to do it. So, giving your set of data on your processes to a model might be able to suggest something that's a little bit better than, what you thought was the best. And trend forecasting as well. I mean, I think for manufacturing and retail, trend forecasting can be great because it can tell you like what to order more of, what to make more of. And sometimes there's like subtle patterns in, purchasing or things that tie to weather or, things that are happening in the economy, things that are happening in the news that might lead to an increased need for something. And it might be something that you don't recognize at first, but a model that's trained on your past data, the more data, the better, obviously, might be able to deliver for you. So I always like to think about like the things that would take a lot of time for a human to do, but you have all of the data there, that it can train on. I think those are some really great applications. With retail, like I said, trend forecasting as well, and also like hyper specific shopping experiences and purchasing insights. I think you always have to kind of ride the line between what's creepy and what's helpful. I feel like that's something that used to freak people out more in the past. And I think a lot of us have become more comfortable with it over time and want a personalized experience. But that's something for retail. And also, you can add a lot of sensors in a retail setting as well to, optimize the environmental controls in a brick and mortar setting or, get a feel for what foot traffic might tell you and, all of that stuff. Some things that might seem pretty mundane, but can be very useful to like keep people in the store because it's comfortable, right? All of those. And then with finance, I think there's some really great applications as well, especially for like security and fraud protection and, things like that, where, we know that with data breaches, with cybersecurity incidents, that sometimes bad actors will like live within a system for quite some time and kind of do small actions before they do something big and bad. And so if you can, find these bad actors early and prevent fraud and prevent, different incidents in real time, that can be incredibly useful, can save a lot of time and also help maintain compliance. And then also like market predictions. I mean, I think that's another thing you need a massive data set for. It's only going to give you like a percentage likelihood that something's going to happen. But instead of just observing maybe a more limited set of data, you can pull in a whole bunch of different variables and have a machine, possibly predict like possible market outcomes. But that can get dicey. And then some of the applications I included for real estate, but Al, I'd love to hear some of your take on this as well. I think predictive models here could also be good. One thing I thought is like, oh, there's an 83% chance based on how development's been going in this area that there's going to be an HEB here. And I know that that's one of the things you look for, in certain communities. Like, is there an HEB? Is there a coffee place? Is there this and that? So I think, you could definitely get the data that you need to form those kinds of insights, have more well-informed comps that are not just, I think human experience is really important in these areas, but you can also kind of gut check, back up, like, am I reacting, because I have a personal bias towards this area, or is the data aligning with the things that I'm thinking? I think could be very valuable as well.
Amazing. I'll put my techie consultant hat again. I did work in machine learning in 2013, 2014, and AI is not new. People just discovered that AI is happening last 2, 3 years, four maybe, but machine learning started real application in the 2011 to 2014 and the GE days, the jet engines predicting a potential failure in a blade, sending then signal to the maintenance crew, and the pilot doesn't even know that they need to change a part. It used to be like, hey, you need to replace this part every X hours, every 100 hours, every 100 trips, flights, whatever. But machine learning was applied in industrial applications long, long time ago. Even Grammarly was doing LLM model in a cute sense probably 10 years ago. I don't know if you heard about Grammarly, but it was kind of like ChatGPT for, how you type and things like that. People didn't know they can replace their attorney then, but now you can, I guess, on simple contracts. Retail, it's been happening forever. Now it's just a lot more focus. So before you even think the Amazon of the world and Facebook and everybody else will know exactly what you're about to buy and send you that in your feeds. But that's just intensifying because they're collecting more data about you, and especially the way you think, not just what you say and what you search. So that's the new thing. Finance, insurance companies have been doing this forever, but now it's intensifying. So they'll know any spending habits, fraud issues. Obviously, it's annoying when it came out. American Express continued to decline my charges every time I do something off. But and then stocks, crypto, things like that. The only thing here is you want to think about like don't trust the data and the outcome of that. So how do you use it to, there's the day traders and there's the long-term investors or the pre-quarter analysis of a company. So you can analyze a lot faster and that will help you do many, many things. So in market insights, whether it's real estate or not, massive. When I say overnight, send me all the insights in the world that happened in the last 24 hours that relevant to me. That data is solid when it comes to strategy, to predictive models. We used to pay CoStar some $800 a month just to get comps. You don't need that anymore. I can make an offer in a property in a market that I have no idea about in probably a couple hours with some confidence if I spend some good time back and forth validating data and combining insights together. So it can be very dangerous, like you can. I was working on a refinery project, no idea what that is. I was in upstream oil and gas, not downstream, not the technology that it was presented to me, and just put in a consultant hat, asking intelligent questions. I was able to actually negotiate a deal with a very SME experienced people who lived in their entire career in a downstream refinery project. So think about like the Shark Tanks asking better questions and smarter questions when they make an investment, fueled by AI. It's massive and it has been used before. So those are very mature applications, and you'll see them when I talk about Investream. We use that side of it a lot.
Yeah, I think the key word is massive. Like you just said, it's like these smaller sets of data were being used in the past, and now it's like even more, that you're able to like take in and analyze and all of that. Um, and I'm gonna kind of like ride the line between like the good and the bad right now, talking about these futures and a little bit about like what makes AI effective in the workplace. But I wanted to share this diagram from the World Economic Forum where they talk about the four potential futures for jobs. What they see for 2030, depending on if AI has an exponential advancement or just incremental, and if the workforce readiness is limited or widespread. And I think that really speaks to like and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but the tension that kind of exists within different industries, even ones that have this mature application and have seen a lot of AI implementation over a long period of time, there's still some tension in these industries that can either, some of that tension can be good because it can prevent you from like making expensive, dangerous mistakes. And some of it can be bad because it can keep you from, moving forward at all. So, but I do think, thinking about how widespread and how exponential the advancement is from here on out will kind of place us in one of these four scenarios. And oh, I wanted to mention too, like I talked about the sensors. I think one of the top 10 emerging technologies that the World Economic Forum mentioned, they do this like top 10 emerging technologies of, and this was 2025, so this was in last summer. Two of the 10 were specifically tied to AI in very distinct ways. Other ones had some connections as well, but these were like the most explicit. And one was collaborative sensing. So the connection of sensors in homes and workplaces and vehicles, like we talked about, like it's recording you all the time. They visualize it as like there's a mesh, all over your house and your car and your workplace all the way to your house. Um, And, those
Think
are,
Minecraft.
yeah.
Minecraft, you know? I don't know if you know Minecraft. That's kind of like
Think the
Minecraft.
net. No, I'm just kidding. No, like, so everything is like trained and managed by AI systems. And then the second, which ties to, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, like misinformation and disinformation, which the World Economic Forum has listed as like a top global threat quite a few years in a row, is generative AI, like watermarking. So, improving issues with misinformation and disinformation with AI, which can definitely be one of the risks as well. But before we get into too much doom and gloom, we also wanted to talk about a fun future slash current application, delivery drones.
Yeah, this one is interesting. I was in Dallas. Uh, I think it was over the Christmas break, and um, in my feed because I was in Dallas, Walmart said, "Hey, did you know that we do drone delivery?" I'm like, "Huh, interesting." I looked it up, and yes, they do drone delivery in Dallas. It was the first actual market they're testing this. And obviously, there's so much drone applications right now for video and military and fun and things like that. But drone delivery was not done by Amazon. It was interesting. It was done by Walmart using the Wing, I think, is one of their vendors that they're testing with. So I thought, okay, this sounds practical. I asked, is it in Houston yet? It's not. So I said, okay, maybe let Dallas suffer a little bit, and then we'll see. But immediately kind of caught my attention. I was like, huh, remember those days where I used to drive 30,000 miles a year or 40,000 miles a year? How about if this drone takes a route that was pre-programmed for all the deals that I want to look at physically. You know, AI can identify the areas. Then we dig deep into the land or the properties. We look at the data and we crunch the data. We do the underwriting, and then we let the drone go on a tour. I call it a scouting tour, and come back with high resolution, nice videos of every property that we're going to look at. So imagine the work of 2, 3 weeks to get to a place where you want to buy or make an offer and close the loop on deals. Now it's done within a day with solid, video and human interaction. So massive productivity. And obviously, we're going to have a cloud full of drones, and I don't know how they're going to manage the traffic in the future, but I do see things useful, maybe sooner than people anticipate. So that's my insight on that one.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Back in my geography days, I was at University of Wisconsin talk of human geographers, where one of the speakers talked about drones and specifically drone delivery and airspace. And so this was, I mean, I want to say 2015, 2016, something like that is when I first heard about this. So, like you said, in the 2011s, you were looking like this was a technology that I was like, whoa, this is so interesting. And Amazon was one of the companies that was really trying to get regulation because they wanted to be able to manage a certain level of airspace and say from this elevation to this elevation, we want to be able to fly our drones and deliver in this way. So, this has been like an active conversation for a really long time. So when you sent me this, I was like, oh, it's so interesting because yeah, this was something that we were all like, well, what does it look like? And the speaker was talking about these, I mean, giant drones that are
Yeah.
like, they're not plane size, but they're like way bigger than you picture in your head when you think about drones. And they're like, obviously these need to occupy a different airspace than these. And they had a diagram of like how it might look and yeah, what our sky might look like. And I thought that that was very
Yeah,
interesting.
watch Tron or all these movies, right? I was listening to Tron music this morning. It's kind of funny. Um, Dubai is the first one of the early cities that are going to have pilotless drone taxis. I think they already signed a contract with a couple of technology companies and Uber. Obviously, the war needs to end there, but it's kind of one of the early adopters. So this is happening at a city level in Dubai with air traffic control, all the things that Sammy talked about. We did applications of drones in about 2015, 2016 in oil and gas. It was beautiful. Kind of the same concept for real estate, but because oil fields, there's no roads, there's no Google Maps. You drive around robin typically, like how you do the day. And we used to route these drones to go check on all the wells for like gas detection, leak detection, safety, some special thoughts of the condition of the machinery, recording the machinery noise, especially those old sort of rod lift, donkey wells we call them. We did all kinds of noise detection, infrared detection, mostly for safety and maintenance. We did the same with refineries in checking out if there's any leaks or flares or anything that needs attention. And think Google Map in the sky, but we didn't have any issues because they're normally remote and not inside cities and all that. And we had special permissions, I believe, up to a certain height, like Sam was talking about. Again, this was done in 15, but again, industrial applications. Now it's going to become more and more prevalent to commercial and consumer side.
Yeah, exactly. All right, now we're going to get into some of the maybe not so great things to think about. I think, one of the things I mentioned is depending on the industry, there are different tensions that exist around the application of AI that could hinder growth. And so one of the things I looked at was a Harvard Business Review report from February of this year about like why AI adoption stalls depending on industries. And they said, the highest positive core belief scores came from people in finance, technology, and healthcare. However, technology and financial services also sit at the center of the optimism and fear tension. And one of the reasons they said this is because these industries have seen a lot in the way of AI and technological advancements, and they've seen things work and fail. And so there's that, caution that comes from that. They said these industries have lived through repeated waves of disruption, restructuring, and skill obsolescence. So, yes, it's a growth option. It can also be seen as a career threat. So, yeah, I think, one of the things that I took away from a lot of these articles is making sure that there's an aligned vision is really important. So they use the example of healthcare as an industry where there's like a good vision, like this is improving patient care. If we can use these tools to get a diagnosis faster, customize treatment, help develop new treatments, new medications, these are all net positives for our patients. So there isn't as much resistance. Obviously, there's security concerns, making sure you're doing things the right way so that it's like HIPAA compliant and all that. Um, and making sure that like patients are aware that their data is being used for training and those kinds of things. But it's like if all those checks and balances, if the governance is in place, the vision is there, and that helps people kind of embrace the new technology a little bit better. Um, the other thing is if there's too much optimism. So, we've got this like lack of vision that can be an issue. But also, if there's too much optimism, that can also be a problem because of governance. Like I said, if you're just like, all right, let's go all in on this tool and not thinking about, compliance that needs to be met in certain industries, safety concerns, making sure that there's like a good structure in place for like who's in charge of what, how do you make sure you're training and tweaking, managing the models properly so that they don't drift in a weird way, things like that that can pose a problem as well. So like having that balance is really important. I also was reading about professional services, which I have a lot of experience in professional services, talking about how like a lot of folks in that industry believe that AI is a challenge to legitimate expertise. I've worked with accountants before, like can be very unfriendly to CPAs who, have to get certain levels of certification to to form expertise. And I think the other thing is, you know, yeah, there's a lot of compliance issues around that as well that you have to be mindful of. You don't want to give bad advice that can land you in hot water. One of the things I think is actually the most important, and I've been thinking about a lot and have talked to my students about, is, you know, juniors, you think of like grunt work and like manual work, and hey, this is lightening the load for our staff as like a very positive thing. But also that means that people who hold junior positions in the company aren't really getting like the 101 of the business all the time. And it's like you kind of need to form that internal memory and kind of immerse yourself in what the nature of the business is in order to upskill and like be more successful in the future. So, you know, you're losing that organizational knowledge that you need to make quick decisions in the future without being like, let me ask ChatGPT about this thing.
Oh, so some of these can upgrade to ugly, but I'll address really quickly here before we move to the ugly, is that organizational knowledge is a candidate to move to ugly. Basically, the new generation is screwed because especially the ones that are just entering the workforce because they're not going to be AI native. They just learned AI recently and they're going to industries that are not adopting AI, but they're like AI, they think they're AI savvy, but they're not. And what's going to happen is they're going to suffer the most. Like they're not going to gain the organizational development and knowledge. We used to hire people and say you're not going to be productive for a whole year because it's going to take you a while to be productive. And yes, AI will accelerate that, but the kind of learning, the way of learning is going to change and they're not ready for it. So I feel really bad for remote workers who are haven't have any organizational knowledge and industrial knowledge. That HR needs to be like red flashes there. Um, yes, adoption curve, great. You know, there's some people who are going to jump the technology and the finance. Typically, every every software developer is going to try every tool in the world, engineers, finance, but that's just going to also create more fatigue. One thing we did within Investream, we shut down all the AI note taker because it was Wild West. Everybody used their favorite tools, and God knows what happens where. And Copilot isn't ready to actually be as cool as these individual niche, applications that are cool and useful. But forget about governance, forget about security, forget about secrets, all of that out of the window. And it's not easy to actually control that because everybody will still use something. We started this webinar and a couple of people had their own note takers already joining the call. I shut them down. Um, and then finally is, if you're like a shiny object, this distraction type of person, also that's bad because it's going to feel like you're overwhelmed and you keep trying things and it's not helpful. And it's going to feel like, again, overwhelming is not good, especially if I see it in many organizations. The first people who said we're going to do AI are who? The billionaires, the CEOs and the CFOs, right? Did they actually talk about with the people? I don't think so. There's a disconnect. Maybe that the lower level individual worker, they're using maybe useful tools that are not governance friendly and security friendly, but at least they're useful. And then you have the CFO and the CEO saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do 88% adoption and 8% ROI." And it's the people the problem, wasn't the technology. Or, so it becomes a lot more why are we doing this? It doesn't make sense, like Sammy said, that mismatch of vision or objective of the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I want to show a diagram in a second. And I'll talk about this more. Yeah, a lot of these are like kind of on the borderline. It's like it's bad and then it can turn to ugly real quick, you know. But, you know, I also wanted to mention this overhead work, like this and underestimation of costs. I think like ROI is a big attracting factor for leadership when it comes to implementing AI. They think about it as like a low cost alternative to like human effort. But they often underestimate the actual cost it's going to take. And one of the interviews I'll talk about at the end as a suggested resource kind of talks about how there is that potential. Sam Altman has said that they're still losing money at $200 a month. At the people who pay $200 a month, they are still losing money with OpenAI. So it would stand to reason that if you get in with some of these affordable tools, they may end up really jacking up the price later. And it's like you depend on it, and then it's like, oh, well, God, it's so much more expensive than I thought. Um, and just the tools in general that are useful. You may not be thinking about the amount of time that it's taking to set it up, to manage it, to check and make sure that it's working, to tweak it. Those are kind of like those invisible overhead costs that a lot of organizations tend to forget to factor into their budget when they're looking at like, is this actually saving us time and money? But that kind of gets into some of the ugly territory as well. But this is like a favorite diagram that Al showed me, and now we both share everywhere. Yes, total cost of ownership. I write about that literally all the time. The total cost of ownership has so many like hidden costs involved that people don't think about, like, little fees and licenses and dotted line things. Oh, your usage was higher. We just got a notification on Monday that like, oh, hey, your automations are almost up for the month. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know we had a limited number of automations. Oh, yeah, there's a cost to that. So once people start adopting it more, those costs balloon as well. But I think this is a great diagram also to look at like all the things that are necessary to make any project, successful in an organization, but AI as well. Any AI projects need all of these steps in place to be successful.
Yeah, that was my life, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. Is every time we talk to any organization or department, they're always like attracted by AI first, or a digital tool, or some kind of a management system, even like the good old days on CRM, the customer relationship management, or SAP, or what is now essential in every business. And we always started with, I know you want the SAP adoption or the CRM adoption, and it's gonna do everything. Great. Let's look. Are you aligned at the leadership level, mindset wise, HR wise? Are you providing the right incentives? Do we have the right skills? Sammy mentioned number one is vision and skills, incentives, HR. Like you want to incentivize people to use these things. It's not a shove it down your throat type of thing. And then do you have enough people? Because like, to adopt something, you may actually need to increase your workforce first, have a lot of project manager, change managers, things like that, maybe additional capacity of the actual workers to get to a place where you can slow down. And slow down doesn't mean letting go of people. Sometimes you actually do more with the same, or more with less, or, so you can grow. And then the action plan is like, it's not going to happen overnight. And every project I looked at, they miss something. And if you miss something, you may have a false start, frustration, resistance, anxiety, confusion, God forbid, all of them at the same time. And you can look at McKinsey again and the big consulting. I think it's like 70 to 80% of change management projects fail because they don't address these five elements. And AI is the same. Take it at the personal level. If I put an objective for my personal goals for this year to take an AI course at a very specific niche that I want to learn. So I'm going to have to spend time and money and how we're going to use it within the business and personally and for consulting. But if I don't put the vision and actually go spend money and incentivize myself to go through courses and leave my business and my family and whatever else, right? Whenever you decide you want to go take a class or something, downloading the tools, learning the tools, testing the tools, because I'm techie. I love to test everything. But that sometimes can take 2, 3 hours out of your day if you're, that techie. And then you'll burn some hours every week just trying to play around with tools and gadgets. And so apply this in your organization, but also apply it personally. Try to translate these into your own daily career decisions, and how much you want to invest in each of these five categories is very important.
Yeah, I think the big question you want to ask yourself is like, what do I actually want this to do? And I think one of the reasons you get to ugly is you'll have organizations or individuals be like, I need to use this tool and not start with the purpose first, just start with the tool first. And that can cause a lot of problems. So one, like I mentioned, it's resource intensive and it can be like a big budget buster for people in a way that they just like don't anticipate. So again, like the total cost of ownership is so misinterpreted that it ends up being this huge drain, and then some people might not want to let it go, and then you feel stuck with it, and all kinds of stuff. So it can cause like more problems than it solves for sure.
And sometimes it's an early divorce for no reason too, because the mismatch of expectations and reality causes like a negative reaction. They actually abandon the tool too early, and maybe the tool is actually good, but just you didn't give it enough time or enough use cases to make it work. And that happens in any adoption curve is like the hype and then the euphoria and then the slide into the trauma and despair. And then you start going up. But maybe in those despair moments at the trough of the curve, you decided to abandon the whole thing and say, you know what? No AI for 2 years until things settle down. Well, you're going to lose the opportunity to learn and adopt and continue to be in touch with what's happening too. So sometimes we make bad decisions by actually doing a lot early on.
Yeah, implementation definitely needs to. I mean, this is something I heard from someone at HubSpot. Like when I first started using HubSpot, well, when I started using HubSpot more seriously in like 2019, I went to Inbound and I heard an implementation specialist talk about everybody loves tools. Nobody wants to implement them. You get a new tool and you're like, now it's going to fix all my problems. And same thing with AI. It's like you need to be very intentional and dedicate a lot of time and energy to proper implementation for it to work effectively. And, a lot of times people just like implement things as, oh gosh, I just remembered there was ClearLink. This was like a year or two ago. I think the CEO of ClearLink, I wrote about this on LinkedIn when it happened. He did this like, state of the office announcement and it was like a return to office initiative and all of that. And also about AI. And he mentioned, he's like, now we should be able to create 40 blogs a day. Like each person should be able to create 40 blogs a day. And as someone who has been a professional blogger since 2007, I went, well, that's not going to be good. They're not going to be, humans are not going to want to read the 40 blogs a day that you're producing if you're just indiscriminately pushing them out. But there was such a mismatch between what he believed the tool could do as the CEO and what it would actually do. And also, and I'll talk about that in a second, like the strain that it's having on the employees to like increase that expectation in such an extreme way. Um, and one of the problems comes from like hallucinations, misinformation and disinformation, yeah, garbage in, garbage out, kind of, kind of a thing. Like these models are only as good as, you're training them to be. So you need to make sure that you're training appropriately. And especially in the early stages, you need to be like constantly checking, verifying, managing, tweaking. Like it's just, not a lot is going to be, unless it's like a very small language model, is going to be right out of the box. So, it could lead to bad decisions. If you're that over optimism that I mentioned, that's one of the big governance issues. And then it could be that you do something externally that leads to a massive amount of mistrust for your organization. And that can be a really big problem. And that kind of aligns with like the compliance and privacy issues. If there's not a very transparent model for like how the data is being used, how it's being analyzed, how bias is being taken into account, all of those kinds of things, that it can cause like massive issues with compliance and privacy.
I'll jump in, Sammy. This is huge. So one of the reason people are dumping ChatGPT, other than the, military application fight, is ChatGPT's bias. Bias is the word that you want to take away from today. People today, the CEOs, programmers, whatever of these LLM big platforms, they're introducing bias on your behalf, and they didn't ask anyone for that bias. They're teaching the models, but there's filters and biases that are injected, and so a lot of companies are kind of get caught into. You have the general one, which is a lot more informed, trained, the chat and the Claude and all that. And then you have like what's happening within an organization where it's mostly co-pilot, you know, not good yet, but that's like governance control, great. And it's internal documents and you upload the PDF. I don't know how many times employees upload PDFs of their company into chat, right? It's bad. It's bad. And you will see like some secret information leak up into other people's searches without you knowing about it. That's one. So the bias need to come in house. Like you need to be the bias. You need to inject your bias. That you need to inject your training. Maybe that's a small language model infused with a large language model. That's not perfect yet. You know, a lot of organizations are adopting Copilot, and a lot of individuals are playing around with all kinds of tools. So that mesh and merge is going to be an issue. But the bias needs to be injected by you training the model and retraining the model. And ChatGPT became, what do we call it? A therapist telling you what you like to hear. That's why people are also dumping chat now because the bias was, I want to make you feel good about what you asked me and make you great. And people have now, spouses, digital spouses, and digital engagement kind of topic. Like things are getting out of control. So think about bias, the bias you want to inject in it, and the bias that it's kind of programmed on your behalf. So you always have to trust and verify, trust and verify.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't even with this presentation, although one of the videos I mentioned talks about it, but I didn't even get into the whole, AI psychosis like conversation and all that. Yeah, marrying, dating, Gen AI. Like, it's a really interesting topic for sure. And I mean, in that, G, like, was it four? I think it was like four was more like, like that. And then they made five a little bit more, unbiased, and people were upset. They said you deleted my boyfriend or whatever. So that is also, I think, a very unintended, consequence. And when I talk about like the offloading of the grunt work, I think that's definitely a problem for junior employees, but I do think it's a problem in general. I really think cognitive debt can be a huge problem with, especially like generative AI, just like always asking questions instead of spending time critically thinking about the situation in front of you. I always like to think about, you know, is it feasible for me to spend the amount of time to think something through, wonder something, figure something out? Or would it take me literally like years to do it and it doesn't make sense? You know what I mean? So when I'm thinking about applications, I kind of think about the level of my cognitive effort. But I'm also, I mean, I'm a writer by trade, so obviously I have my own bias when it comes to those things. But I think having working your brain in that way is really important. And there was like that MIT article. I'll also share that as like one of the resources. And they talk about your brain on Chat GPT and how, if you're asking, chat or whatever, similar Gen AI models, questions repeatedly and you're trying to like figure something out and like recall things, your ability to recall the information that was presented to you drops dramatically when you're outsourcing that cognitive effort to a tool. So thinking about, what it is that's important for you to retain is like very key.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in because I talked to a lot of teachers recently. We're hosting a family convention, and there's a lot of teacher workshops, and there was a lot of talk about the impact on elementary school, middle school, high school. This cognitive debt is unknown, uncharted territory. We did lose some of our mathematical, skills when the calculator was invented. We don't remember any phone numbers now because we have the iPhone. all that fun, right? But in human development, brain development, and cognitive ability development and memory development, I think this is uncharted territory. There's a 10,000 reps to master anything. That is scientifically proven. If you want to be an athlete or develop a new habit or master something, you're supposed to repeat that thing 10,000 times. They say 1,000 to be good at it, a 10,000 to master it, right? So what's going to happen to learning? A lot of early anticipation of what's going to happen is we're going to teach kids to think more. So that prompt engineering is going to be huge and it's going to alter a lot of college and school courses. And then context engineering is a new one, is how do you actually come up with the best context, which is I called it bias. How do you inject your own bias into the process of training the model and then into the questioning that you're using the tool for? That's going to be huge. It's going to alter the education world completely in schools and in colleges. Maybe colleges first and then schools second is the way I anticipate it. But it's going to be big. And I think that's another industry that we don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to impact. Maybe we're going to master the cognitive ability, but lose the memory side. And how does that going to look? So I'm worried about this immediate next generation before that the world figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, as someone in a university setting, I obviously think about this and talk about it to my students a lot. They're all about 19 to 21 years old, and I think, Deja, your question in the chat is like a good one. I wasn't sure. So our university does not have like a global AI policy at the moment. So the responsibility to develop a policy is left up to individual classes and instructors. So I ended up having a conversation with our students, and I was like, what do we want to do? Because the year prior, I had seen so many. I was like, oh, yeah, these are all generated responses to essay questions in the quiz. And I didn't create a policy. So it's like, I can't penalize something if I didn't, I didn't create it. It feels wrong. So I was like, I'm going to start off the year, with this. And I was worried that there was going to be like eye rolling or resentment or like, oh, you're behind the times. And I'm interested to see how this changes year to year. But I had an open conversation with my students, and a lot of them said that they want to avoid it. They want to walk away from it. They felt like students who were using it, that it wasn't fair to other students who were putting in effort when they saw their classmates use it for essays and things like that. So I said, okay, well, where do you think the applications are fair, where they make sense? Where do you think you should have to disclose your use? And where do you think it's like unnecessary or unacceptable? And we actually implemented what we call like a 10-minute struggle rule, where if there's like a question, this actually came from when I did coding boot camp back in the day, and it was a 20-minute one, and they said, okay, let's change it to 10. I said, fine. So if there's a question that you're struggling with, struggle with it on your own for 10 minutes, ask a classmate, you two struggle for 10 minutes. If you both can't get to it, then come to your instructors. And if we don't know, then you can go outside and, ask chat or whatever. And so we've actually seen them implement those things as well. So, I'm largely an optimistic person when it comes to these things. I do see a lot of everyday successes where they go from like struggling with something and not getting it to like magically getting it. And so, I hope that that's where we're heading, but I do think that we have to like be careful about, what this is going to drain. And it obviously is more effort to implement those things and to push that forward than it is to just like, I don't know, let the current take you or
Yeah,
whatever.
and like we're gonna sound academic, but Sammy and I specifically are the techiest in the organization that we're a part of. So we're coming to it from a techie first, academy second, and then maybe change management third. But we're gonna share some good news here in a second.
Yeah, yeah, there's good news too. But yeah, I think one of the important things, besides like not understanding the background in terms of the budget drain, is also like the productivity drain. Because I think a lot of companies implement AI because they want to reduce work. And one of the articles I found was like, even people who think that they're saving 20% of their time are actually, it's taking them 20% more time to complete their tasks, which is just invisible to them. And one of the cautionary tales is really like this can lead to burnout, turnover, low quality work because something's running in the background, but it is actually something you're still processing and thinking about. And like, I'm going to talk a lot about Cal Newport, but his book, Slow Productivity, my favorite book of last year, talks about that as well. This idea of, to do knowledge work effectively, you need to focus on fewer tasks, work at a natural pace, and obsess over quality. And when you're naturally splitting your attention, if you decide to do something in the background and you're working on something else, quality is going to be one of those things that like gets affected pretty quickly. And downtime, like there needs to be, we aren't AI agents. Like we need to have downtime. We need to connect with others. We need to like build relationships and just have time to chat. And that renews us to do better quality work in the future. So that's, it's not about just go, go, go all the time. That's
Yeah,
actually not
think
good for
about
our
like
bodies.
people who are successful, like the best CEOs in the world are the best time management experts in the world. The people who focus more, produces more. Multitasking is a myth generally, unless it's a low task, low effort task or low, thinking task. Multitasking is a myth. Typically, females are better at multitasking, but again, at a lower level, because their brain tends to connect things faster than men, generally speaking. But so about the successful CEOs, they time block their entire week and include all the things that Sammy talked about. Make sure that we have time to read, time to pray, time to reflect, time to do sport, and no phone, no technology. And you're talking about like the most techie people. I'm not talking like good old school Warren Buffett type of people or Jack Welch. I'm talking about Elon Musk. They focus. Problem with go, 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 your brain doesn't absorb anything. You're outsourcing your brain. You're making amazing fast decisions. But 6 months later, you feel like you're a firefighter the whole 6 months. And you're like, what strategy did we accomplish? Yeah, maybe I made 2,000 decisions faster, but it's not internalizing. And you're not accumulating knowledge. Think of like all the interactions you have with AI, it's not saved in a knowledge base. It's saved in the cloud. You're not building knowledge. Even if you're the expert, you're not transferring that knowledge to your peers yet. I know with Copilot, with long, big language model and a small language model converging, that will be the case. But we're not there yet. So now you're like outsourcing your brain in the cloud, and the real work isn't really improving because nobody knew that, somebody outsourced their brain and maybe came up with an amazing idea, but it's not internalized in the organization nor inside your brain. Neural new connections requires depth, a little bit of trauma, like something that will make you remember what happened. We can move on, Sam.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, let's talk about the other interconnected network we want to talk about besides our brains, and that's the question of, is there an AI bubble? And it was so interesting. Like we had planned this topic for quite some time. And I mean, I want to say in December, we're like, in March, we're going to talk about AI. And then just this week, we heard that Sora is folding, and there was a $1 million or $1 billion deal with Disney that fell apart. And I went, how significant is that in like the grand scheme of things? And like, what can that mean for the AI bubble? And this is a Bloomberg diagram that came out like last year about the money that is put into AI, and a lot of it is coming from graphics cards, GPUs and TPUs are what, power AI models and data centers. And obviously it's in, the best interest of these, enterprise companies to be like, there's so much demand. We need all this stuff. And then there's also these data centers that are buying up all these graphics cards. So little old me, who might want to upgrade my computer, it's becoming very cost prohibitive to do those kinds of things. Good thing I built mine not too long ago, so I don't have to worry about that. But if you're trying to get, those kinds of things, more memory right now, like good luck, right? So there is this like massive economy, internal economy, like around these networks. So the idea is if the hype doesn't, if the reality doesn't live up to the hype, and there's enough of this that falls, will all of it fall? And because it's making up such a big part of our economy, that's going to hit the stock market and that's going to hit like the everyday person. It's not just if you're in tech, it's not just if you're investing in these companies. The fear is that it's going to like ripple out. One of the videos that I'll share, in resources later. I'm a big fan of his name is The Plain Bagel on YouTube, and he's got like really nice nuanced takes on, the economy. And he's a big it depends person like I am, so that's why I'm a fan. But he's like, maybe there's a bubble. There probably is a bubble of some kind, but will it pop and when will it pop is like a very big, complicated question that's going to depend on a lot of things. And, you know, I'm sure that there are people who are already like betting on this and trying to time the market and investing appropriately. I think we're going to talk about that more next month at next month's webinar. But, that's kind of that's a very risky proposition right now because there's so many, even though there are like a few major players, there's so many different variables involved. So, yeah, I mean, you see this circular economy, in this diagram. So, yeah, there's a bubble of some sort, but will it pop and when is like, I think still a big question mark.
Yeah, every investor that asks me, I say, I don't know, but here's my recommendation. If you made a lot of money, good for you. Exit the market and pay taxes. And cost average, when I say exit, cost average. Continue to exit because we're going to trend down before we trend back up. So when it comes to S&P 500, how many of these are in S&P 500? The circular economy is biasing the S&P 500, and we talked about it in a previous webinar, how the economy is actually shrinking if we remove the AI and some healthcare and some other industries from the economy. So in a way, we are already in a recession, but it's masked by the circular economy. And so I would say it's a matter of when, not an if. I believe it's a win, not an if. And I've seen a couple of deals. Obviously, what Sammy talked about in terms of like memory and chips and all that. And then we're just waiting for the Taiwan problem to happen. I think geopolitically, that's one aspect. The electric bill, the water bill for these data centers, and the way they fund these. So the circular economy is like NVIDIA handshakes with OpenAI, and then that handshake news bulletin increases their value by, I don't know, 100 million, 200, 3, 5 billion, whatever. And then that extra delta thing, they go build a data center with. So it was like a handshake, inflate the valuation, we bring the money in, we build a data center. That's the danger of a circular economy. And the problem with even the seasoned investors, what are you going to invest in? You're going to invest in boring real estate, get 6 to 8% cash flow? Of course not. You're going to double down on Nvidia, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So even if it's not done by the circular economy of the tech, the chips, the software, and the data centers, every smart investor need to put a big portfolio in this because it's still growing. But I think we're getting closer to the finish line. And my general advice, and I'm not your CPA or financial advisor, da, 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 da. Um, if you have made great money in Nvidia, good for you, OpenAI, etc. But general advice, you need to cost average down in the next few months because things are gonna bust, regardless of what's happening in the war, even on the general global economy in the Middle East. Things are gonna bust. Think that the best analogy I'll give you is the dot-com bubble. In 1998, 1999, everybody said we're gonna do Amazon.com. we're gonna buy things. E-commerce is gonna be amazing. There was like a gazillion e-commerce company. And when did we actually use Amazon and general public use was COVID. And so it took from 1999, 2000 to 2021, 2020 to really adopt e-commerce. In the US, the most advanced technological adoption country, right? I'm not saying AI will be the same. It's not going to take 20 years in the AI cycle. It's going to be accelerated. But that was the best example you can think about. We will, I think, and I believe we will have a financial bubble. It doesn't take anywhere anything from what we showed you in the good, the bad, and the ugly. AI will be adopted. AI will change the human race, in my opinion. But are we gonna get into a bubble? I think yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to talk about too with that plain bagel video, if you end up watching it, one of the things to think about is OpenAI has like $1.5 trillion worth of deals. So you hear 1 billion Disney deal collapsing and you're like, "Oh my God." But then you're like, "Wait, 1.5 trillion deals? Like, okay, it could be a first domino. It could be like a really tiny first domino, but it's you got to wait in the next like weeks and months to come to see like what's really going to happen." And how fast it'll happen. I also agree. I think it's not an if, it's a when for sure. Because there is so much hype and there's not enough to live up to that hype. And I think the problem is people are looking to large language models to fix everything. And I think they're looking at the wrong scale and the wrong applications. And that's like a big impediment. And also, a lot of these small models don't even require as much in the way of resources. They don't require like huge data centers to function properly. So even if the applications expand and the scope expands, it might not take up as much real estate. So, there may still be like vacant, data centers or ones that take a long time to build up.
Yeah. In the
The
last 100 years also of market bubbles, you want to think about the more gray the explanation is about the hype, it's not everyday person understand why, the worse it is, the bigger of the decline it
yeah,
is. Think about like real estate never busted except when they invented derivatives. What is a derivative? God knows, right? So, real estate is cyclical and all that, but like when it became derivatives and financial engineering, we had a massive bubble. And this is what's dangerous here. Nobody understands really what's happening except people are in the industry. And so what you get outside when you watch MS, like the NBC business and all those Fox business and all those channels, they're talking in generalities and they don't really know what's happening. And that is a bad sign because it's like, yeah, we trust the expert. Every expert is incentivized to introduce bias, let's say, not lie, but introduce bias.
yeah. And I think I'll close this by just saying, one of the biggest things, if you're trying to like, well, back the leader, right? Like, well, OpenAI is like, one of the big dogs right now. NVIDIA is one of the big dogs right now. We're going to back it. One of the things that got covered in the plain bagel video was like, during the dot-com bubble, Netscape was the leader. And now not a lot of people know what Netscape is if they're younger. They probably have no recollection of that company. I know I asked Asia the
How
other
about
day.
PayPal too? PayPal is kind of living now, but
Yeah.
where's PayPal today? Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, Netscape, they didn't survive, right? So, it's like I think that's such a good example of you can even think you're backing the leading thing right now, but it doesn't mean that it's going to like take us into there. Um, But that's all doom and gloom. But, I do strongly believe that there is a sweet spot for this technology, even if there is, yeah, like Al mentioned, there's still the good, the bad, and the ugly there. Regardless of what happens, like economically, there are still very good applications that have been used and will continue to be used and will continue to improve over time. And I am a strong fan of humans. I'm very pro-human. And combining human expertise with technological know-how, I think, is always the way to look at it. Um, Especially when it comes to those things that are really hard to, replace, like building relationships and forming that really deep expertise and all of that. And there are agents that are promising to do some really advanced things, but I think we both agree that like, yeah, it's way too new. Like it can't be that useful to you right now in a wide variety of applications. Maybe a narrow thing that you train it to do, but and Cal Newport talks about that in the interview, you know, why should I have this tool do all these things for me? Like, well, how does that even make sense? Like that's probably not going to be the future for us. But yeah, I don't know if you want to talk more about uses and then we can kind of go into the what it
Yeah,
means
I'll
for us.
cover
Yeah.
that later. That's fine. Yeah.
But yeah, I think, in general, like, yeah, due diligence, ideation, market research. Actually, that was with our AI policy that we created in class with students. They said, we think like brainstorming and ideation and mock-ups for products, because we had a couple students create products that it's in a food service management class. And they're like, we think that those are appropriate, but then when it gets to final designs, we're going to hire, we're going to have a student do our graphic design for us in the graphic design school. And all the final language has to be ours. And if we do any background, we have to corroborate what we find, make sure that we know where the sources are and corroborate the research. And that I thought was like a very reasonable place to land. And I think they did a great job
Yeah.
co-creating a policy.
One thing I would add from a philosophical point of view, and I think it's gonna AI is the anti-industrial revolution. I truly believe in that. Humans eventually will become more human. The industrial revolution forced humans to be robots. You're just gonna have work on this widget on an assembly line, and that's all you're gonna do all your life. That's not why we were created. And so there is an amazing evolution that can come out of AI that will bring people to become more human and outsource the things that the Industrial Revolution introduced over the last 200 years. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Terminator and all the things that can go wrong with military applications and cybersecurity applications and things like that. But if you really extremely zoom out, I think AI will make humans more human and the human currency will become more valuable. I'm just worried about the transition, but we will get there. And that's a great news is humans are going to become less robots and more humans. And to keep it real, this is what we did in Investream. We actually signified our own business. So we came up, I mean, obviously every team member came with ideas and tools, and they've used some of their own tools. But Investream is an investment firm, real estate development, etc. So um, personally, I tested a lot of things. Different team members tested different things. So I'm not discouraging people from playing around and testing and experimenting. As long as you're aware of the time and effort and confusion and anxiety that that might cause. But yeah, we've tested and experimented in every department, every tool. We can't help being techies. Um, but we found, you know, different applications made sense. Perfect applications, good application, not so great yet. And so that's how I categorize these. When it comes to research, strategy, opinion, amazing. So market research, general research on steroids. It's amazing. So I can run and understand markets, submarkets, zip code, asset classes every morning, have an insight report. Amazing. It used to like you have to talk to so many brokers and agents and data gatherers and data services and pay a lot for that money for that services, but solid application. And I think this cuts across all industries. When it comes to market research, general research, academic research, I mean, ChatGPT passed the board of medicine and the law with no effort, right? When it comes to that, no problem. As long as you ask the right questions and you have an expert engaging in these tools. So we love it. We love it, and we're gonna double down on that. When it comes to due diligence, checklists, operations, very useful, but you have to trust and verify. So this concept of continuous dynamic SOP building, building knowledge base. I think there are some things happening there, but we still have to have experts sort of double checking and aligning and cleaning and training the models. But what we love about that, we believe small companies can do big things in the future. The learning curve of organizational development and organizational complexity and policy making and building SOPs and real-time updating SOPs and building that knowledge base is going to be huge. And in real estate, it helps us like screen deals a lot faster. It helps us track projects and identify risks a lot faster. But you have to use it with caution, and you have to have an expert review on a daily, weekly basis. So it's great for screening. It's great for building the core elements and someone kind of finishing the work. And then finally, strategy, ideation, scripting, beautiful, but use it at your own risk. Marketing first, hype. We're gonna write blogs, we're gonna do videos, we're gonna do scripts, we're gonna do this, and that. All sounds the same, and nobody actually reads that anyway. So same thing for strategy. It's like you can ask chat to become Warren Buffett and give you advice. Are you gonna trust the data if you don't know what you're doing? Same. So it's amazing applications in strategy ideation, in workflow ideation, in content ideation. That actually enhances and speed up the process. But you need that human confirming the data, checking the resources. Kind of think the good old go to the library and pick up a card and read books on steroids, and you're doing it way faster, but you're kind of following up and looking at another resource and another resource and another resource until you get to a place where you feel good about it. One thing that we've recognized in our organization within Investream, a lot of the team members come with ChatGPT answers, and we're like, we caught you, but we forgive you. Um, at the leadership level, at the individual level, be like, I see what you're doing. It's probably giving you more insights, but it's in and out, in and out. We keep asking the same question. We keep repeating the same mistake because you're not really internalizing it. So I see I see the applications with the more senior people in the team, phenomenal. We don't need to hire an attorney for 90% of our contract clauses because it's not that risky to do legal review of documents. I mean, Adobe, amazing legal reviewer, identifies the risks and suggests what I send back to the attorney. So I have like a paralegal now in Investream. I have a para accountant, not an accountant, maybe a bookkeeper, but not an accountant. You see, this is the line where compliance, deep expertise, but we're already doing it. We're using legal reviews. We're using it for insights on financials. We're using the insights on market. We're using it to build knowledge base a lot faster. We're becoming a much more mature organization and punch above our weight because of AI and because of adoption of tools. But again, with caution, and we love it. It's just this period in time where we just need to be very careful of how we're using it and who's using it and what level of expertise in the team are using it and constant feedback. We're still experimenting of certain tools, but we're limiting the noise right now. We're shutting down tools also. We already started shutting down tools and replacing tools in the process. So it is very helpful, very useful, and we see some productivity, but it's not mainstream yet.
Awesome. So thanks for first of all listening to us for this long. We got a lot to cover. I know we normally go an hour, but hopefully you found this all really useful. And I will be creating a resource document for all of the articles that I've included. And it'll go out with the YouTube video and with the email afterwards as a recap, just so that you have it all. But I did want to include a couple of resources of my own that I really recommend, and I won't go into great a depth, but everyone who's encountered me since like last fall knows that I like won't shut up about Cal Newport because I really think he's a really smart guy. And he does computer science. He's a computer science professor, but he also writes popular books. The next ones on my list are Digital Minimalism, Deep Work, and what's the other one called? I think The End of Email. So I'm really, really excited to read his books. But one of the things I checked out just recently was the This Is Going to Be Very Messy video with Hank Green talking with Cal Newport about like applications and basically Hank Green, if you don't know him, watch his videos too. They're great. But he's just like, kind of ranting and raving about AI. And then he brought in Cal to be like, okay, where did I get right? Where did I go wrong? Like, where am I catastrophizing? Like, what should I be thinking about? And he offered a really well-reasoned, measured response. But for those who are interested in like optimizing knowledge work, Slow Productivity is a great book for thinking about how to work at a different pace. I also included Unmasking AI, which is somewhere behind me, but I didn't grab it to show you. Which is a book all about algorithmic bias. It was written by an MIT trained scientist and poet, and she also had created the Algorithmic Justice League. Dr. Joy is amazing, great intellect, like great resource for thinking about that side of AI. So those were two things I included, as well as the best real estate investing advice ever, because those books are chock full of information that, you don't need to go to chat to get.
Yeah, I added a couple more. Sam and I enjoy the same kind of set of thought leaders and books, so we have our own bias too, but that's intentional and based on experience too. B 2.0 is talking about like how people need to think about redeveloping themselves to be adaptive, but also first aligned with their intrinsic values and not hijacked by the fast-paced environment. But it also applies to adoption of technology and being aligned with like what is the future career or the future business. So reinventing yourself in this fast-paced, especially for the people who are not maybe early adopters, but more second wave, not tech savvy, don't need to freak out, but you really need to rethink about realigning first to your values and to the environment around you because things are going to be different and you don't want to be left out or be introduced into an environment that is not a good fit for you given how fast this is happening. Obviously, Harvard Business Reviews, they always have up to date short resources that are very powerful that you can read and then double click. Switch is a great book if you want to talk about change management and organizational adoption of anything, not just technology. And in the changing world order is more macro economy and where the world is going. And they talk a lot about, Ray Dalio talks a lot about the, how you want to adapt as a person to the changing world order behind everything that you think may not impact you, but it will, whether directly or indirectly. We'll link all these for you. As you see, we are book biased, although we're AI adopters. But again, the PhD definition, I don't know how many years ago, Sammy, you can correct me, but it was a doctor of philosophy in any expertise. So think of how humans are going to become a lot more knowledgeable. The information access is going to be much faster, but you still have to be semi philosopher to really advance into something. Is that 10,000 reps thing that I talked about?
Yeah, one of my favorite I don't know, fun facts, I guess. I'm in a science field now, and science used to be interpreted as natural philosophy. And I think we've lost a lot of that philosophical thinking as scientists over time. And I find it really important. That's why I like bringing in like scientists, poets, and computer science people who think a little bit differently. I think they're really onto something and they've got that like philosophical bent to the work that they do. And that's so essential and important and human. So thanks everybody for bearing with us and listening. And we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely segment this one because there's a lot of topics we covered today, and I think it's gonna be amazing. And we may double down on one of the two topics based on the responses we get from our viewers because we covered a lot of ground, but there's a lot of depth into them as well. Uh, Appreciate it, Sammy. Appreciate everybody's time. we will see you in the next webinar. Have a good one.